The Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
You are a brick tied to me that's dragging me down. Strike a match and I'll burn you to the ground. We are the jack-o'-lanterns in July, setting fire to the sky.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Cerberus Radio Network, protecting liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. My name is Suzanne Sherman. This is the Wasatch Report. It is Friday, November 17th, year of our Lord 2017, and I have a special guest today. His name's Jason Staker. He hails from Idaho, and the other day I was talking about Discovery Channel's Bushcraft Build-Off series debut, and he's going to be joining us. That took place right in my backyard. We have a few film industry projects going on here. Once again, we're still using our 18th century principles of limited government talking and applying them to modern day issues. And I like to tie in the history with the prepping and survivalism because there's a method to my madness. I like to let people know, when there is going to be a struggle of one form or another, the more prepared you are, the less likely you are to have to rely on government or somebody else for your personal responsibility, because this was the way of the times back then. You didn't have a large central government right there or even a local government. You were on your own. Want to remind you, we are live 717-467-1736 if you want to join me later on. And remind you also, we do have an app you can tune in and listen to our shows. We have the Paradigm Shift with Jeff Johnson, who's also my producer. He's with me today in our virtual studio, and he has a show, The Paradigm Shift. We go live 2 hours back to back on Monday mornings, and he and Daniel Bailey, the other founder of the network, have their show, The Renegade and the Rambler Radio Show, and you can hear them as well. We also have podcasts from Mike Meharry at the 10th Amendment Center, and he also has a Schiff Gold series of podcasts with Peter Schiff, and gold investments are one way you can be prepared for what I also see an inevitable failure in our economic system here. I guess we need to have him call back. I just got your message, Jeff. He says, call me when you want me. No. Okay, sorry, everybody. All right, so what we need to do is he's going to call us back, but I want to encourage you to listen to these shows. Speaking of the 10th Amendment Center as well, they recently published my article about how we worship the central national government and as opposed to God, and that's been getting a lot of reaction. And he just said he just tried and he's going to try again. Jeff, is your phone going or not?
This time I didn't get the call. I missed the first one, but I didn't get a call this time.
717 number. Yes. This is why I just like not having guests, but these guys are really cool. We do have some really amazing guests coming up as well. I'm going to have David McIntyre. He is an author. I'm reading one of his books right now that he sent me. He is also, if you're not familiar with him, the winner of another Discovery Channel challenge, and that was the season 2 winner of the show Alone. He's a really interesting guy. He's going to be on. I spoke with E.J. Snyder last night. He was a 3-time successful participant on Discovery's Naked and Afraid. He's going to be on. He'll be available sometime in December. In December, also, he will be gracing the cover of Off Grid magazine, and they're going to be doing a feature story on him. And I want to let the people in Florida know on December 1st and 2nd, there is a National Preppers and Survivalist Expo going on, and that is at the Jack's fairgrounds. So if you're in the area, go and check that out. EJ will be one of the keynote speakers there, and they will have classes available, sessions where you can go and get special instruction there. If I was in the area, I would absolutely go myself. So if you're in Florida, go and check that out. So are we ready? Is our guest available, Jeff?
No, I still haven't got a call. I'm gonna try to get his number from him and call him. I'll let you know when he's on.
I can give you his here. I can give you his number. Let me text it. I'm going to put it in our group chat right now so you can have that. Because we don't want to say that over the air, do we?
No,
Here,
I don't
that
think
in there.
we would appreciate that a whole lot.
And then I'll make sure I'm not talking to myself as I'm typing it out. All right. All right, I just sent it to you. So, okay, well, I'll tell you a little bit as we're going. Oh, tying into this also, at the Utah Natural History Museum. This is in Salt Lake City. It's over at the University of Utah. Little local news here. They have a Vikings exhibit going on right now, and we're members. We try to support the museum, and we went there the other day, and this just goes. It says a Google subscriber you have called is not available, Jeff. So why don't you just call him at that number? Can you call him, Jeff?
Suzanne, I'm on the line with him. I'm going to hook him up right now, and you will have him live in just about 15 seconds.
Okay, yeah, I love the benefits of live radio. But over here at the at the Utah Natural History Museum, they have a seasonal exhibit. This one is going through the end of, I think, January, and it is on Vikings. They also have a Native American exhibit, and that's always there. And you can see how these bushcrafting skills go back in time. And this is what was used around the world. So you can see the Native American, the old shoes that they had made, the basket, handcraft they did, the other tools, also the weights and measures that the Vikings were using, and just how this has evolved. And we still have people that are using these skills right now. And you might ask yourself, well, why would I ever need these now that we have modern day conveniences? And when Jason is available, we are going to have him explain exactly why. So is he hooked up and ready to go?
He's on. He's on. Hold on.
Jason.
Yeah.
Jason, are you there? We got it done. Thank you so much for joining me. You and I had a good little talk last night. I'm delighted that you're able to come on the air with us. I'm just going to recap. You were on the debut episode of the Bushcraft Build-Off series. Tell us a little bit first about yourself, and then we'll explain the premise of the series.
So, yeah, my name is Jason Staker. I currently live in a town called Louisville, Idaho. It's just outside of Idaho Falls, about 15 miles north. I've been in construction for about 20 years, but, you know, all that time and even before then, I've been, you know, just a big outdoor person, you know, hunting and fishing and hiking and four-wheeling and snow machining, and just, you know, I've been doing that my whole life. So, yeah, that's kind of just a little background of myself.
And this show, how did you come about being on this show? And the show essentially focuses on bushcraft skills, survival in the wilderness. Why don't you tell a little bit about the show, and then we're going to bring in some of your experiences there.
Okay, yeah, I got hooked up with the show from going to primitive skills conferences. The one that I went to, that there was a talent agency going around looking for people to do this show. It's called Rabbit Stick. It's every September, just outside of Pittsburgh. What was that?
Rabbit Stick. That was the one I was going to say. I wanted to go there this year, and I wasn't able to make it.
Yeah, it's the longest running primitive skills gathering, I think, in the United States, I'm pretty sure. So this year was the 30th anniversary of it. And it's funny because local people still don't even know that it's around. So you know, it's not something that you advertise. It's not something that you try to shove down people's throats. It's stuff that, you know, when people find out about it, they come and visit it and they're just blown away. I mean, that's how I was when I first went there and saw what people can make with their hands, and the knowledge that all these people have that are not your normal everyday knowledge and not your normal everyday skills. It just, I mean, I was hooked instantly. And so
it's a great community. It's a great community. I like to encourage people to go to these expos. I met Billie Holiday at, I think at PrepperCon last year. And that's where I found out about rabbit sticks. And I really wanted to go this year, but that's when they were filming episodes of Yellowstone at my home that same exact week. So we weren't able to get away, but it's a very welcoming and inviting community. I invite people and encourage people to go to these exhibits, meet the people there. They're so genuine and willing to share this information. And, you know, some of the terms, Jason, might be a little bit confusing because I talk about prepping, I talk about survivalism, but I don't really talk about bushcraft much. And there are some very common overlaps, but there are some areas where bushcraft is completely unique and where they don't overlap. Why don't you explain what bushcrafting is?
Well, bushcrafting, and I don't, you know, I mean, I've never looked up the technical term to it, but bushcrafting to me is being able to go out into the wilderness or any other type of environment. You know, I mean, you've got high mountains, you've got aspen groves, you've got river bottoms, you've got all these different types of environments that you can go out to, and inevitably you may find yourself in one of those, you know, environments in an emergency situation. And bushcrafting to me is being able to, if you find yourself in an emergency situation, or not even that, if you're just out there having a good time or whatever, but you are able to look around you and take what's around you and use it to survive, or use it to whatever. Like if you want to float across the river, you can take what's around you and build something to get yourself across the river, and you know, just anything like that. Bushcrafting is being able to look around you and take what's around you and build whatever you need to survive.
I think they also refer to it as primitive survival skills. And the host of the show, Matt Graham, is certainly an expert in that area. And the premise of this show is, again, speaking of aspen groves, that was the environment in which you built your shelter, you and the competitor for that environment, BJ, I don't remember his last name, but he had his 68-year-old father. I was talking about what a great family show this is for people to watch. But this is a matter of taking, again, exactly what you have around you. I think everybody was allowed to have one tool, but in the initial challenge, who could chop the tree down first, you had no tools. You had to use what was around you. Now, there were 4 criteria for judging the shelters. I don't remember what they all were. If you do, go ahead. I know one of them was structural integrity, being safe from wildlife. Livability was another one. If you had to be there for some time, could you be there and not just survive, but survive and thrive and be comfortable? Do you remember what the other 2 were?
One of them was functionality, and which 2 did you? There's functionality, craftsmanship.
Okay, craftsmanship. That was the other one. And boy, howdy, you knocked it out of the park on all 4 of them. And BJ's was really good as well. In fact, I think I told you the other day, a mule deer took a strong liking to it, and she moved in that very afternoon. And when we went up there, I took 2 of the other participants to see all the shelters so they could show their kids. She poked her head out the door. It's like, I felt like we were intruding upon her. So I'm hoping that she's enjoying, and some others are enjoying some wonderful shelters, because it gets brutally cold out here. You're native of Idaho, so you're very familiar with this environment yourself. And, you know, earlier you mentioned snowmobiling. So, you know, I want to let people know, you might not think you need this stuff. You could be snowmobiling and your machine can break down. Happens all the time with those darn things. We go out there hunting elk on snowmobiles in that very area where you were. We were out hunting turkey there, and we go out in a and a side-by-side buggy. You never know. You're putting, your life in the hands of just simple machinery. And if that goes down, people will think, well, you're obviously prepared if you go out there, but people really aren't. And I mentioned this story to you, and I've done a show about this actually, about the Kim family who was going from San Francisco to Oregon over Thanksgiving sometime back. And they got lost. They went on a loggers road and they were trapped in the snow. And had they had these bushcraft skills and some sense of being prepared, they were traveling with 2 children on the road through the wintertime. Had they been prepared, my friend Brian Lee from the Sierra School of Survival said, had this been his family, they would have made it an adventure and hiked out that 20 miles, no problem. This is where these skills can come in handy. When I was first talking about this show and showing some videos of my attempts at friction fire building, people were just laughing and saying, oh, you can just use a Bic lighter or matches. But, there might come a time in a longer term situation where you either don't have a lighter or it runs out. So you might be very grateful. People can get in a situation where there's a plane crash. We've seen instances of that. These are useful skills, not just a fun hobby. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, absolutely. I'm amazed every time I go out. Like this last summer, I went and hiked the Sawtooth. And I mean, that's the highest, some of the most rugged mountains you can get into in Idaho. And I was amazed at how many people they didn't have anything on their backs. They maybe had a little water bottle attached to them. And I talked to them and they were like, well, we'll just come out here for the day. We don't need to pack very much. But I don't think people understand how fast. I mean, I've been in a couple life-threatening situations in my life. And I got myself into those situations just out of pure stupidity. And it's, you're literally laying there, which one of the times I was laying there, probably almost 3rd degree hypothermia. And I was looking up at the sky and it was snowing on me and I was freezing, basically literally freezing to death. And I was thinking, how did I get myself in this position? And it was funny because that experience taught me a couple things. It taught me that, nature can turn on you so fast. And I don't think people understand just how fast nature can turn on you. And the other thing it taught me is, luckily, I think everybody has a deep will to live that most people don't realize they have it. And most people have never tapped into it. But that experience taught me both. But back to what you were saying is people are just getting this day and age. It's just too easy to flip on a light switch or turn on the TV or open your phone and make a phone call, or they don't understand that nature doesn't play by those rules.
No,
they don't care if you have a cell phone. That battery is going to go dead eventually, and your Bic lighter is going to run out of fuel eventually, and you're eventually going to run out of matches. And if you're in a bad enough situation, all that you are going to be down to eventually is the clothing on your body and the knowledge in your head.
I'm curious now, how did you survive that situation? You said a 3rd degree hypothermia, snow coming down. Tell us the end of the story. What happened?
Well, I was able to make a phone call, luckily, and I called one of my buddies. I told him where I had a 4-wheeler parked. And I told him, if I can get to my 4-wheeler, I should be okay. But I wasn't 100% sure that I was going in the right direction. I had actually gone to one peak thinking my 4-wheeler was on top of that peak, and it wasn't there when I got there. And that was when everything really started setting in. I had to drop down off that peak and go another, I don't know, probably 2.5 to 3 more miles. And this isn't just like a flat walk through a park, 3 miles. It's straight up, straight down 3 miles. And it got to where everything was so slick, and I had been hunting that whole day, so I was already exhausted from the day's hunt. And it got to where I would slip and fall, and I had to just lay there for a few minutes to get the strength to stand back up.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I just saying, and luckily I got to where I was hoping my four-wheeler was, and it was there. So, but I mean, my toes were completely frozen. I couldn't feel my toes. I couldn't feel my hands. I was shivering uncontrollably. I mean, it was, you know, and I tried to get a fire going with what limited stuff I had. After that experience, I carry a hatchet, just a little lightweight hatchet. I carry that hatchet with me everywhere I go, because I learned in that experience that if, you know, nothing was dry, but with a hatchet, you can hack your way into the center of a log and find dry material.
And that
So I
one
never
tool,
go anywhere.
that one tool can give you so many functions: to access the wood, to help you build a shelter, to defend yourself if need be. And, you know, it's interesting. The things that you had mentioned here reminded me when you said nature turns so fast. People might think that, oh, well, this guy, you know, he's crazy enough to go out in the middle of nowhere, and I never have to worry about this happening to me. This happens to people just going on a trail. I was in Arches National Park, and you have to pay attention to the weather. We could see that the weather was turning. When we were at the top, we booked down the hill. The lightning was streaking across the sky, and there were families going up that hill, and it's about a mile. It's about an hour hike to go up there, where these people had little kids with them, absolutely no way to get shelter there. And it is amazing how quickly that can turn dangerous. When we were in Grand Canyon, I had a friend that was with us and our boys, and she couldn't hike. So we thought we were just, when you said the words, we were just, and I was just, we say that's the time you need your equipment with you. We were just going to hike a trail along the rim while my friend took the shuttle bus. Way off in the distance, we could see there were monsoons, but that was far away, Jason. We weren't going to have to worry. So when I figured we were just going to take the shuttle, I left my pack at camp. So I figured we're not going to need it. Well, that lightning and that weather system got right overhead. I mean, lightning directly overhead. And we know people get killed by lightning there every year. So everybody else is huddling under trees. And there was a retaining wall that fortunately blocked the wind and the hail. And we were able to stay dry. We were the only ones there. Or stay at least protected from the hail and the wind, but we were absolutely soaked. We could not get back on the buses to get shelter because they were full. There was one driver that said, he pulled up and said, I have room for 10 people. There was not one man that got on that bus that let women with small children on before them. I was very disappointed in humanity at that point, but we did get out of there. But the point of this story is, this is what can happen when anybody thinking they're going to be in a public area, accessible by transportation, whatever, you might not be able to rely on that. Had I had my pack, we could have wrapped ourselves in the tarp that was in my pack and ridden out that storm and gotten on a shuttle when the numbers had reduced significantly. So always be ready. Let's talk about your shelter a little bit, because what moved me about this was, by golly, this thing was so sturdy. And my first thought was, I think a bear would be discouraged from getting in here, because if you're in a situation like that, you're going to have some food in there with you. And tell me a little bit, did you have a plan in mind when you started this? What was going through your process when this shelter was built? And my friend Mikhail was on your team too. It was great to see you guys working together.
Yeah. So when this all took place and I realized it was really going to happen, I, just kind of started to think, because I wanted to build something. And I say this, I wanted to challenge myself on this build, which I truly did challenge myself, but I wanted something different. I wanted something that stood out, but I also thought that I was going to have, certain materials that I had in mind to do my build. Well, when we got there, I started messing around with, different plants and different tree bark and different stuff like that to try to come up with some cordage to, lash things together. A lot of my original plan on my build was going to require a fair amount of cordage to tie everything together. And it just wasn't there. And it just wasn't going to happen that way. So I've always been a very creative individual. I've always been able to, you know, in even in construction, when I was working for other people, you know, I've been self-employed for a long time, but back in the days when I was working for other people, the guys that I would work with always wanted a plan start to finish. And I was never that way. I never cared what the finished product was going to be, because I always knew I could figure out whatever problem came along midway and make it work to my advantage. And so I've been that way for as long as I can remember. So when the materials weren't there and we had to come up with something else, that's when I just had to get creative. And that's when I just, you know, I started thinking more conventional building, how there's a bottom plate and a top plate and the studs. And, you know, obviously I can nail anything together. So then that's when I thought of the notch system and doing that. You know, most people would think round. Well, square was way easier to do with the limited tools we had than round. Plus they don't twist or anything like that. So that's kind of how that whole idea was born, just out of needing some other way to do what I had planned, but didn't have the materials to do it. So,
well, definitely
and it turned out.
your skills as a contractor showed through. And did you know that you were going to be interweaving these saplings into the support poles like you did? Because that looked like it was absolutely tedious amount of work. Obviously, somebody that's stuck in a long-term survival situation on their own couldn't do this, but this shows what people are capable of with practically their bare hands. I was really impressed. So who came up with the idea of weaving these saplings? And man, that was a long process.
Yeah, I think me and Mikhail were brainstorming, and I think we both, it's hard to remember exactly, but I think we both kind of came up with that idea to weave those things through. But what's funny is I never realized when we weaved all that stuff together, on the ends, we were wrapping them around the solid trees that were planted in the ground. Those were our main supports. And as we weaved those saplings, it was like pulling the structure like into itself. And like it was crazy. Like as about the time we got halfway up with those saplings, I remember saying, man, it's like pulling this whole structure tight. Like you couldn't budge any of it. And I guarantee you a bear could probably eventually claw his way through there, but he would, before he got through that, he would have long since given up and decided there was easier stuff to get to.
Well, and yeah, because I know being secure from the wildlife was a concern. And again, this was literally in my backyard, so I'm very familiar with the wildlife there. So I think as far as bears are concerned, we have the black bears here. I think the bigger danger would probably be a moose. And in fact, one of my friends, they have a friend and they live in Jeremy Ranch, which is right outside of Park City. And her next door neighbor was hiking on the trails right behind their house a few weeks ago. And she just got trampled and attacked by a cow moose who happened to have a calf with her. So the dangers that they focus. The moose was one of the examples of the wildlife. Mountain lions was another one. So they gave a very accurate description of the wildlife challenges you face there. I don't know if you're aware of how serious the mountain lion issue is here. This place around here is literally crawling with mountain lions. I posted on Facebook the other night, my son was coming home up our road, part of where, I don't know if you remember when you drove up where there was a little feeder where there were some bulls on the right side of the road as you're coming up the road in a part called the Narrows. Well, my son was going through there and there were 3 mountain lions, a mama and her 2 babies were with her. They were almost full grown and they were just right on the side of the road, and he stopped and they were about within 20 feet from him, and he'd never looked into the eyes of an apex predator. But one of the things about your structure that I thought was absolutely fantastic was the door system you had, because I tell you, if there's a moose or a mountain lion, you see that, describe your scenario, or describe what you did, your solution for getting into safety really quickly, because we loved this.
Yeah, so one of our challenges was was obviously to protect ourselves and our resources against wild animals. And a door, if there is a shelter with a door on it, I guarantee you that door is always going to be the weak point in the shelter. And so when I was trying to think of a good way to do the door, I came up with how I did it, and it's hinged at the top and it swings up and down instead of open and closed. And what that allowed me to do is when I swing it open, I prop it open with a stick, and then I actually, on the outside of the door at the bottom, I put a bunch of sticks that we got sticks, we hardened the points in the fire, and then we put them in the door. So when the door swings shut, it's actually, I think there was about 10 spikes sticking out. And, you know, they didn't show it on the series that aired on Tuesday, but when it swings shut, there's a bunch of spikes sticking out. And I turned to Matt and I said, you just solved two problems. You killed the animal that was trying to kill you, and now you also have dinner.
You have some dinner. And they did show you using that door where you ran in and then knocked the support, and that just closed and did its job. And again, I'm not detracting from the skills of the other team, but it was a lot more involved for them to open and close their door. So this, you could be running for your life, and then boom, there's dinner as well. It solves two problems in one. I thought it was ingenious. Something else to think of that you also managed to accomplish was having a stone floor. And when we were there, Mikhail said that you guys had a fire going in there that actually was so warm you had to get out of there.
Yeah. And that idea kind of came from so part of our challenge also was this was a 4-season structure. You had to, you know, part of the challenge was to live in it for, you know, a whole year. So you've got all seasons. So I was trying to think of a way that would make it warmer in the winter. And, you know, I mean, I don't know how many people realize this, but rocks absorb heat during the day and then they give that heat off at night. And so I thought, you know, I didn't know how much time it was going to take. Looking back, I probably could have done a few other things instead of doing that rock floor. It definitely took a fair amount of time to find the rocks and get them all put in there and stuff like that. But ultimately it was a cool part of the shelter because I wanted something that would, you know, if I truly had to live in there for a year, I wanted something that would absorb that heat during the day and then give it off at night. And that's also where the two, I don't know, they really didn't show on the highest end of the shelter. There was 2 windows that we made that were just like the door. They pivoted up and down, and there's 2 windows that can go up and down independent of each other. And that was both for smoke from the fire to let smoke out, but it's also to close it off, you know, open it up during the day and let the sun in and hit those rocks, and then close it off in the evening. And
I believe that was facing west as well, so you'd get the afternoon sun on there. I mean, you, no pun intended, left no stone unturned on here. And you had I think there was a loft again for bedding there, and the craftsmanship on these structures. Again, the only ones I didn't see were the ones on water. So I want to encourage everybody to watch this show. Like I said the other day, it is great fun. It's so hard to find family-friendly, useful entertainment on television these days. So kudos to Discovery Channel for doing this. And before I let you go, I want to just talk about the importance of fire building. And people might not get to the point where they can actually do a friction fire, but it's amazing to me how people can't even build a fire. I don't know if you know who John McCann is, but he has a survival and self-reliance school. And he also wrote a book called Wake Up Call, which depicts a couple that is completely unprepared. They have a massive earthquake and they think now they're going to make some coffee, and they just tear up some newspapers and light a match. And what he taught me is the way he described, there's a difference between making a fire and actually building a fire that's useful. And this is something that you can learn about in what Michael Hawk referred to as camp living room or fort living room.
Yeah.
start building a fire, even in your own, if you have a fireplace, or if you have a wood stove, or if you have a fire pit, or even when you go to a campground. It's a skill that takes a little practice, even with the benefit of coal or twigs or logs, and whatever you have there. It's not as easy as it looks. So now imagine trying to do a friction fire on your own. It's something, I think it's a skill that's invaluable, because food, shelter, and water, well, to stay warm is absolutely crucial. You also mentioned that survival mindset when you were in that situation. And that's something else that Michael Hawk had said on my show is, you find something that means the most to you, and you find the way to survive and get back to that. Most of the time, your family, and you tap into that. So anything else you want to add? I kept you longer than I meant to. I appreciate your staying with us this long.
No, that's good. And just to touch on the fire briefly, I wanted to say that a lot of these bushcraft deals on YouTube and even the primitive skills gatherings and stuff like that, these people always have these pre-made hand drill kits. And I used one of those the first time I made a fire with, using a hand drill. And it was actually pretty easy. And so it was kind of misleading, because ever since then, I've thought, okay, well, if I'm out in the wild and I get in a situation, I'm not going to have one of these little pre-made hand drill kits with me. So, maybe I will, but I probably won't. And so I actually started going out, and I would just find material that was around me. And I'll tell you what, it's a whole nother ball game when you're just trying to use what's around you to get a fire going. And I've tried many times. I've got a lot of smoke, but I have yet to actually get a fire going with just gathering stuff that's around me. So, maybe just a little piece of advice to everyone. If you go to these primitive skills gatherings, or you look all these deals up on YouTube now that have all these bushcraft survival little tidbits and stuff that you take into your own life, don't just assume that if you see it on YouTube and somebody's doing it, that you can just go out and do it. People need to go out and practice this kind of stuff. And it's actually really fun. I mean, like you said, you can start in your own backyard. You can start in your fireplace in your living room. You can start, you don't need, there's a lot of people that don't live right next to a forest. They can't just take off and go out in the forest and start learning how to survive. But you can definitely do stuff in your own house, and there's books you can read and stuff like that. But you've got to get out and get some hands on, because you will be surprised how difficult it actually is.
When you really need it, you're going to be under the gun. You're going to be stressed. You might be hurt. You're going to be very uncomfortable. And even with doing my prepping here, I moved up to the mountains, and I wanted to have the best of both worlds. If things never go bad, I'm in a great place. I'm remote. It's quiet. If things do go bad, I have a stream going through my property. It's spring fed. I have a spring here. There's plenty of game. So what did I decide to do? I don't need it now. I'm going to need to hunt in the future, but I started hunting now, because when is the time you want to learn how to hunt, how to field dress? Not when you're hungry. The time to learn these skills is before you need them. And stuff like the fire building, I'll tell you, when Mikhail and Tyler were up here, they had their kids with us. Tyler, his 3 kids were just spread out on the floor, out on our grass here. We're doing the friction fire, and my son was with us, and it's a really fun family activity, as opposed to people sitting around a fire with their smartphones in their hand. Do something smart, get in touch with some of these skills. The kids absolutely eat it up. It was so fun to see them do this.
Yeah, they do. The youth is hungry for this kind of thing. And I don't think, there's a lot of parents out there that I don't think they understand. Kids have it inside of them to want to do this stuff and want to learn it. It's just parents aren't taking it out and giving them the opportunity to do it. And man, they need it. The youth today, they need this kind of stuff now more than they ever have before, because they're just growing up to think that everything around them will take care of them all the time. And it's just not the case. And I truly believe that we're going to get to a point where we're going to start seeing a lot more, bad accidents and unfortunate fatalities that could have been avoided had people had some knowledge. So.
Yeah, and when we talk about kids, I'll share a quick story with you about how hungry they are for it. I was flying back to California to visit family. I think this was a year or two ago, and there was an 18-year-old boy that was sitting next to me, and he was going back for the first time in a couple of years. His parents had sent him out here for wilderness therapy. I'd never heard of this. Wilderness has always been my therapy, but they actually have now official wilderness therapy organizations, very big out here in Utah, because again, we have so much wide open space. But I was familiar with organizations like this because I practiced criminal law when I was in California, and there is a California Youth Authority ranch near where I used to live. The same premise: get these kids on a ranch, get them away from all this stuff, get them outside and give them responsibilities. And he said, I didn't do anything bad. And I said, well, what made your parents send you there? And he goes, I'm addicted to video games. And I said, what does your family do? We had a long conversation. He said, well, my dad's into finance and he really likes golf. So that tells me a couple things. He lived in a gated community, it also told me, and his parents were super, super busy, and it was just easy for him to occupy himself with video games. He was also socially awkward. So again, rather than facing the defeat of failed friendships, he just turned to these. But what did his parents turn to save this kid? But they didn't participate in themselves. They just farmed this out to somebody else. And, I'm delighted that this kid finally got out there to experience this. I was sad it came to that, but this ties into the importance of fire. They could not have hot food until they were able to get a friction fire going so they could heat their own food up. So it's amazing what wilderness does for the soul, and it is just such a good way to be prepared, because when you're going to need it. We have so many examples when it has been an important skill. And Jason, I want to thank you so much for joining me and taking time. I know that you're self-employed, you have a business to run, and I hope you come back and we see more of you on this show and shows like it. If you ever have any products that you're going to start selling, I know you're going to try and change your business focus around a little bit, let me know. I'm happy to help you promote them in any way I can.
Yeah, and just in closing, I just want to say, I don't know if I can give my cell phone number out or whatever, but I have taught, and I will continue to teach, people, whatever they want to learn as far as outdoor skills. I mean, I do brain tan, buckskin, the friction fires, just any survival skill or whatever. I've got a big shop in my backyard. I've got a lot of things that I use just right here in my backyard to teach primitive skills. So, if anybody's interested, I don't have any web pages up or anything like that right now. I am working on that. I do make antler jewelry. I make like deer antler rings and stuff like that. I make knives, so just, those kinds of skills too or whatever. But can I give my number out? Or
I don't have a web page either, but how about if people follow you on Facebook? Can they do that?
Yep, just my name, Jason Staker.
Yeah, it's the way it's set up on Facebook is actually Jason R. Staker, Jason R. Staker, Staker, and you'll see a picture of his shelter. Works at Black Timber Construction, so you can follow him there. And anybody that's interested, send me maybe some of the pictures of your craftsmanship. I'll put them up on my page. People can see what you do. What part of Idaho are you in as well?
Just north of Idaho Falls, about 15 miles.
not far from me at all. I've actually been through there a few times. So yeah, we'll keep you in the loop here, try and share some pictures of your craftsmanship. And I so appreciate your joining us today. Jason R. Jason R. Staker. And he was the the victor in the opening salvo of the Bushcraft Build-Off. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, take care.
You too.
So, Jeff, we went almost the whole show with that one. Are you there, Jeff?
Yes, we did. Yes, we are. I'm just double checking that the phone calls ended, and yes, we're.
Okay.
That's it. I'm doing producer stuff in the background here. I wanted to let's go to a break because we blasted through everything. Well, it's up to you. We don't have to take a break. We have 15 minutes left. It's up to you. Break, no break.
Okay. Let's just plow through this.
Okay.
I had a couple local things I wanted to follow up on. One, I discussed an issue out here, Broovies. This was out in Salt Lake City area. There was a legal challenge to a Utah law that prohibited certain adult content. Now, we're not talking pornographic, but certain adult content where alcohol is served. Again, this is a community. Utah is a state that was founded by the Mormons. We have some laws like this, but there's a movie theater that serves alcohol, serves beer. That's why it's called Broovies Cinema and Pub. And they were cited for showing a movie, Deadpool. And the Utah Attorney General, a federal judge found it was unconstitutional that the state statute barred depictions of sex or full frontal nudity in places that serve alcohol. And they're not going to appeal this law. Once again, this is a state law. Nowhere in the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8 has Congress been allowed to have any say over local regulations such as movies and beer. So we have a local law, and the movie cinema owners went to a federal court to seek redress under the First Amendment. So here we have, again, the misinterpretation of the made-up incorporation doctrine affecting a local city and affecting local community values. The state's public acknowledgement, reading from an article here in the Salt Lake Tribune, said that it was not appealing the case. There was a 41-page memorandum filed this week. The state argues that paying the $534,431.05 in legal fees that the Broovies legal attorney, former Salt Lake City Mayor Rocky Anderson, asked the court to approve. I mean, this whole thing, the federal judiciary has absolutely no business getting involved in that. And this really ties into, once again, our desire to turn to a national government for redress. When we do this, everybody seeks control from a very small group of individuals, and we've become an oligarchy. When I discussed the nationalism article that the 10th Amendment Center published, I discussed the Lincoln Memorial and how everybody has been taught that this is just a matter of ending slavery. Because slavery ended after the war, it's assumed that slavery was the cause. I also submitted on my webpage, our Facebook page, a podcast with Kevin Gutzman and Tom Woods, where they discuss this notion. It's a brilliant conversation. I urge you to listen to that if you haven't done so already. But just to reiterate, I also want to refer you, I'll put this up today as well, Mises.org has an article going back from 2002 by Thomas DiLorenzo, where he does address the fact that the war was over. It wasn't just over slavery. He addresses the fact that tariffs were a huge issue. And he mentions his book, The Real Lincoln. If you want to learn the truth about the War of Northern Aggression, I urge you to read this book. he starts out by calling this the Civil War, or the war against the war between the states. And this is what it's really accepted to be. First of all, I've said this before, it was not a civil war. A civil war is when two or more factions can desire to compete for control of a political entity, and that wasn't the case here. Nor was it a war against the states. This was a war that Lincoln waged to use the might of the federal government, and because there was so little support for it in the North, he had to hire a lot of mercenaries from Europe to fight this battle. So it was not a war among the states. The CSA just wanted to leave. Secession was a right they had every legal right to do. But we are told that this was about slavery. So in the book, The Real Lincoln, DeLorenzo points out that there is overwhelming evidence that Lincoln was a failed one-term congressman. He would never have been elected had it not been for his career-long devotion to protectionism. And in 1861, the Morrill Tariff was passed. And in that case, Lincoln was expected to enforce this tariff, and this was the event that triggered the invasion. And that resulted in the deaths of 800,000 Americans, according to revived census estimates. The article does go on to explain Lincoln's protectionist policies, and this is what got him elected and got him the support of a key state of Pennsylvania. And interestingly, Jeff, when I was at Fort Sumter watching this, or getting a tour, the guide asked at one point, everybody, what was the cause of the war? And everybody chimes in and yells, slavery. And I yelled, tariffs. And they all looked at me like somebody came and invaded from outer space. But this is the accepted narrative. And this is why the Lincoln Memorial is viewed as a temple. So we fall into this notion. I want to tie in also with an article my friend Carl Jones, since we have a few minutes, wrote. This was for the Abbeville Institute. And Carl Jones, if you might remember, was the co-author with me on our book article from the 10th Amendment Center on national reciprocity. But Carl, in this article called Reconstruction Continues, I'll post this as well, tells about an incident when he was looking at his son's history book. And what he noticed right away was that, first of all, it was way below what he would consider sixth grade level. But what happened was this book is just another example of how the indoctrination of nationalism and the overall might and strength of the general government takes over the states. So, for example, he refers to the Constitution and our form of government using the terms national and federal interchangeably. And this is something I've mentioned too. This is the problem when you allow them to be interchangeable. It creates confusion. There are two entirely different conflicting forms of government. As I've said before, the Constitution, as ratified, created a federal, not a national government. James Madison said that repeatedly. And the national government that he proposed, with a strong central government, the states being subservient thereto, was out and out rejected at the Philadelphia Convention. It was never even subjected to ratification. So notwithstanding this issue of nationalism and federalism, we have the nullification crisis as it was depicted in 1832. And this book shows that Andrew Jackson, or their opinion, opposed the view that states could reject or nullify laws of Congress, and the crisis just ended. But what he's not mentioning here is that the mention of the compromise was forced on the general government by the state of South Carolina, where the tax was lowered over a period of 10 years. So this threat of nullification and the fact that Virginia was not going to let Jackson's forces march through their sovereign territory to get to South Carolina had a huge factor in this matter. So this was a pivotal episode in American history, and it's relegated to one sentence, which insinuates that the president made his ruling and South Carolina was forced to comply. So, this is a real issue. Again, we're forced to have this acceptance of federal supremacy. He also mentions that traditional conservatism and the ideas of self-government on this continental landmass all stemmed from the Southern traditions of rugged individualism and distrust of centralized authority. Now, Jeff, when I was starting to teach my kids about school, I first was believing the traditional scenario. Well, the North, they were far more evolved. They had factories, they had more of a developed infrastructure, and the southern states were primarily agrarian. Therefore, they had to rely on slavery. And my knowledge evolved from thinking the war was about slavery to Lincoln saved the Union to now really knowing the truth. And thanks to our authors like Thomas DiLorenzo and the Abbeville Institute we have here, people can learn that our traditions really came from the South. And it appears that the mission of these government created and sponsored textbooks really want to distort this view. So the North is portrayed, as I just mentioned, as a society that embraced modern era skills in the antebellum era, and as a result that was characterized by steamboats, powered steam trains. But what people don't understand is a lot of the infrastructure in the North was paid for by egregious taxes and that were implemented on the southern states because they relied significantly on imports. So it's important to understand we are forced to accept these notions because they are ingrained upon our young children. This is why it's so important to look and do what Carl did. Look and see what your kids are reading. So the book also addresses, I want to just continue this article for a moment longer, the Reconstruction segment of the book. It intimidated that carpetbaggers were Northerners who came south and who were, quote, not liked by the Southern people. There was no mention of the causes or the disdain against them. The fact that was that the South was under a brutal occupation. If you don't think that the brutality was there, look at Sherman's March to the Sea and what they did. And so the Confederates were stripped both of their firearms, their right to vote. They were being robbed, plundered, pillaged by the Northern invaders. And in mentioning the Reconstruction, the Klan, of course, is brought up, yet the Union Leagues were organized by the Republican Party to terrorize the Southern people, both black and white, like I mentioned, Sherman's army, no relation, did not submit to subjugation, are omitted. So there's no insinuation by the textbook that the Southerners were just naturally averse to having people among them who were simply trying to help. And that's what we see. Even I've seen TV documentaries that show how invaders from the North were there to just simply reconstruct, rebuild, and get the Southerners back on their feet. Back on their feet from what? This invasion and this absolutely vicious attack. So Carl continues and concludes his article by saying he's barely scratching the surface with these observations, but what little he's highlighted here should paint a clear illustration of what's going on. And I'll add to that, not just in these textbooks, but look at the news media and in the Washington monuments and what we see there ourselves. So do you want to say something, Jeff? Sounds like you're moving around.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I don't have my mic muted. I am moving things around because I'm preparing for the end of the show.
No, not a problem. I'll wrap this up right away. So the subjective manner in which they paint the South, the traditional conservatism and the vastly negative light would be readily apparent to most of the readers of the source of this article, the Abbeville Institute. But this is the problem I alluded to earlier. The average sixth grade child is simply not going to be aware that this is not true information. You know, the kids are rewarded for simply regurgitating the information that's fed to them in these books. So they get good grades, their teacher's happy, their parents are happy, they get rewarded with other benefits, more television time, maybe a special treat or whatever, but they're rewarded for getting wrong information and simply repeating it. Many of these kids, unfortunately, are going to grow to be adults without ever further examining any of this information or without seeking the proper context and the historical completeness. I always say consider all the totality of the circumstances, all the factors here. So we have this narrative of a backward South in contrast to the ingenious, innovative, and enlightened North. This is what I alluded to earlier when I thought I was going to be teaching my kids that will, in many cases, stay with them for the lifetime. So this book simply jumps from the war between the states to the progressive era and all of the wonderful ways in which government advanced society. And Jeff, this is exactly why we as Americans tend to worship government over God. When government is pushed on these kids, God's kicked out of schools. This is exactly what we get. This all ties together. I want to thank Jason Staker for joining me today. Jeff, thanks for all your behind the scenes efforts. I know we got it done at the last minute today. We'll catch you on Monday. And we're going to start highlighting after Thanksgiving some gifts from people like Jason, some of our author friends, and some of these bushcraft survival prepping gifts as well for the upcoming Christmas season. So thank you for joining us here on the Wasatch Report on the Cerberus Radio Network. We'll catch you next week. Have a great weekend.